Here in front of us is a 2008 Audi A4, equipped with the 2.0 liter turbo engine and a CVT transmission. This Audi A4 is the third generation B7, which was made from 2005 to 2008 or 2009, just depending on the model and what you got going on. Right here laid out on the floor are the tools that we used in this video: sockets and extensions and a torque wrench. And a couple flashlights. If a man can't see, he can't repair the car. If you guys find this video helpful, please go down below, hit the like button, share it with anybody else that might benefit from it, and also subscribe for future videos we'll have on this channel, future how-tos. Both me and the master mechanic would really appreciate it.
So we're gonna start with taking off the center cap here for the wheel. To gain access to the lug nuts, pop it off. Then before we take our lug nuts off, we're gonna jack it on the lift point right here on the pinch weld on the side of the vehicle. We're gonna put the floor jack here. Before we jack the vehicle up, we set the parking brake because we are working on the front of the vehicle, so the rear will hold it in place. We're just gonna get it up high enough to get the tire off the ground a couple inches. Take our lug nuts off. Move our wheel out of the way. Next, we're gonna remove the axle bolt here. This is gonna get discarded because it is a stretch bolt and you need to replace it when you replace the axle. So this axle came out of the cage on the inside, the inner CV, so the axle shaft is spinning, so I can't break this loose. So I'm gonna have to hold the axle shaft in order to break this loose. So I'm gonna try a pair of pliers first. So it's gonna spin this way, so I'm gonna grab it. So the pliers will grab it like so. And then I'm gonna push the pliers up against the control arm, so in case it whips, it doesn't smack my hand. So this gets discarded. So being that the axle came out of the inner CV, I'm going to remove the axle shaft just to get it out of the way. We have parts of the CV joint here where it came out. It's all going to get thrown away. Now I'm going to remove the 6 bolts for the inner CV. So I'm going to put the vehicle in neutral so I could spin the inner axle shaft where it bolts to the transmission and get to the other bolts. Oh, got some resistance, but you can spin that inner housing here. Man, it's got a lot of mess. And you see this is where it came apart. The whole cage came out and it fell apart when driving. Lost all of our forward motion. So before I put the axle in, the inner bolts that bolt the axle to the transmission is 11 foot-pounds and then 52 foot-pounds. So they do two torque increments, or 15 Newton meters and then 70 Newton meters. The outer ones, you have to be careful because sometimes it'll be different hardware. The old one is a Allen headed, and then the new one is a 27 millimeter socket. Both a stretch bolt. The new one gets torqued to 140 foot-pounds or 190 Newton meters and then 180 degrees. So we have the new axle here. It is recommended to replace the axle as an assembly. So I'm gonna slide the axle in here next to the flange over here to the front. Now we gotta line the threads up. We gotta make sure that our flange isn't catching on anything back on the inside here. So you kind of gotta wiggle this in. So I need to rotate the axle a little bit to spin it around. There's a tube up in there. I'm gonna put the bolt in the end of the axle here, and then I'm just gonna use a ratchet so I can spin it by hand. Once it pulls it all the way in, that is. Now I can spin it around this tube. There it goes. So now we got it around the tube. See that tube here? This is the tube. I had the axle in front of it here, and it has these little bumps in the axle. So I rotated it around this to come back below it. So now I'll put the axle back in the transmission here. So I'm gonna get our bolts started in here by hand and make sure none of them are cross-threaded or anything. If you start 2 of them opposite from each other and trying to run them down by hand, it'll hold the axle and everything in place. These actually thread in pretty easily by hand. So you can see I got one started over here on this side, and I got one started over on this side on the opposite. So now the axle is held in there. Still got some slop to get any movement to line up the other ones. I got all of my bolts started. So the first torque is pretty much just making sure that it's all flat and evenly mounted on there. And then the final torque is your actual tightening it. So we're gonna set it at 11. And we're gonna do a crisscross pattern to make sure that it's seated nice and evenly. So our axle, now we have it in neutral. See the axle turns? So I'm gonna go ahead and throw it in park really fast. So now that I have a park, it should rotate and then click into place. If you heard that click, it just clicked right there. So now it's held. So this lower one here, I changed this extension, is a wobbly extension, so I was able to get to the bottom there without having to take it out of park, put it back in neutral, and go back and forth. I just changed the extension to get to these lower ones. I'll just double check now that I got them all torqued, make sure I didn't miss any. This is the extension I said that I swapped to. It's got a little wobbly end on it, so when you put the socket on there, kind of gives it a little bit of movement. So now I have the inner all torqued. So we started out with 11 foot-pounds, 52, all good. So now we're gonna go to the outer here. We're gonna do our initial torque at 140, It's already snugged down because we used it to spin the axle by hand. So now we're just gonna bring our 140, hopefully one little pull here. There we go. So now I'm gonna kind of cheat. So we're gonna mark this up because we need to do 180 degrees. So we'll go straight up top, we'll do a line. Then we're gonna use our impact. So we don't need our Allen because now we're a socket. So we're doing 180. So we're gonna wind up at that line at the bottom. So now we have our axle completely installed. We made sure our rotor is lined up with our lug pattern, our threads for our lug studs. Now we're gonna put our wheel back on, hold the wheel up there, a couple crisscross, just snug them down to hold it in place. These are gonna be torqued to 37 foot-pounds and then a final torque of 89 or 50 Newton meters and then 120 Newton meters. So we're just gonna snug them down with the impact and then I'm just gonna torque them the final 89 foot-pounds. And we'll install our center cap. So it has these 3 little grooves. Make sure you line them up on your cap. And we'll lower the vehicle back down. Axle replacement is complete. That's how you replace your passenger side front axle.